Good morning, ELD2. I would say it's nice to see you, but I can't see you. You could see me. It's probably nice to see me, huh? Yeah. All right. We're going to continue on with our curriculum. So we're kind of starting at page 329. You can go to MyNG Connect. Go to MyNG Connect. Click on this top thing here. Go to level A student. And we're on page 329. So I'm just going to type in 329. We're going to find this here. So we can look at the vocabulary there. I'm not going to spend any time on that right now. Well, I tell you what, let's go ahead and I'll say them real quick. We have the word arrange, destruction, dignity, guardian, intervene, survive, veteran, willingly. So you might be at home by yourself. It's okay. Repeat these out loud. You need to get your tongue and your mouth used to making these sounds. Say them out loud, even though I cannot hear you. Say it with me. Arrange. Destruction. Dignity. Guardian. Intervene. Survive. Veteran. Willingly. All right. So what we're going to look at now is over here. So you can find this page 328, 329. We're looking at this idea of chronology, how events follow a timeline pattern. We got this cool word here. It's pronounced eulogy, and it's what we usually say at a funeral. When someone has died, we'll usually read something that we wrote down to remember the good times with this particular person. So we're looking at a eulogy, which is to honor the memory of someone. All right. So chronology, I'm just going to dive in. You can spend some time looking at that page if you want. I'm actually going to read from my textbook here, but you are certainly welcome to follow along on your own. Post-traumatic stress disorder. Post-traumatic stress disorder, or PTSD, is a mental condition that can result from a life-threatening experience. Someone can get PTSD after being in a war or a serious accident. Until recent times, PTSD was called shell shock, and people thought it was only caused by wartime experience. People who are in a natural disaster or who are violently attacked can also suffer from PTSD. People with PTSD often have nightmares and flashbacks about the experience. They can have difficulty sleeping. They also can feel as if they don't fit in with other people anymore. These symptoms can make it very difficult for people with PTSD to lead a normal life. PTSD can lead to alcohol and drug abuse. People with PTSD often have family problems. They may not be able to get and keep a job. Some people have even lost their homes as a result of their problems. Men, women, and children of all ages can suffer from the disorder. About 30% of the men and women who have been in war zones suffer from PTSD. About 8% of men and 20% of women who witness life-threatening events will develop PTSD. And roughly 30% of these will suffer with it throughout their entire life. He Was No Bum by Bob Greene. I don't know what's better. Maybe you'll have to tell me because the page here. So I don't know if you can see that well enough. If you'd rather just, kind of look at it on your own or follow along with me this way, but here we go. A bum died. That's what it seemed like. They found his body in a flophouse on West Madison Street, Chicago's Skid Row. White male, approximately 55 years old. A bum died. They didn't know him. He was no bum, and his story, well, let his story tell itself. The man's name was Arthur Joseph Kelly. Growing up, he wanted to be a firefighter. When he was a child, he would go to the firehouse at Aberdeen in Washington, the home of Engine 34. His two sisters would go with him sometimes. The firefighters were nice to the kids. This was back in the days when the neighborhood was all right. Arthur Joseph Kelly became a teenager, and then a man, and he never quite had what it takes to be a firefighter. He didn't make it. He didn't make it into the Army. Oh, sorry, he did make it into the Army. He was a private in World War II, serving in the European Theater of Operations. He didn't make out too well. He suffered from shell shock and messed him up pretty badly. He was placed in a series of military hospitals and then, when the war was over, in veterans' hospitals. Whatever had happened to him in the service wasn't getting any better. He would be released from a hospital and he would go back to the old neighborhood in Chicago, and suddenly the L train would come rumbling overhead and Arthur Joseph Kelly would dive to the ground. Some people laughed at him. He didn't want to do it. A loud noise and he would drop. He walked away from a veterans hospital in 1954. He decided that he had to live in the real world, but he was in no condition to do that. He tried for a while, and then he went back to the only place that he remembered as being a place of happiness. He went back to the fire station at Aberdeen in Washington. Trying to turn the page here in two books. Some of the men of Engine 34 remembered Arthur Joseph Kelly from when he was a boy. They remembered him as a bright-eyed child wanting to be a firefighter, and now they saw him as a shell-shocked war veteran. They took him in. They fed and clothed him and gave him a place to sleep and let him be one of them. He wasn't a firefighter, of course, but he lived in the firehouse, and he had the firefighters as his friends. The military people didn't know what to do with his veterans benefits. So some of the firefighters went to the Exchange National Bank and arranged for the benefit money to be paid to a special account. The firefighters of Engine 34 took it upon themselves to become Arthur Joseph Kelly's conservator and guardian. The years went by. Some of the firefighters were transferred, and some retired, and some died. But there was always at least one firefighter at the station who would take responsibility for Arthur Joseph Kelly. The firefighters didn't ask for anything in return, but Kelly would stoke the furnace and clean up and help out as much as he could. There were maybe a dozen firefighters over the years who became his special guardians, the ones who would deal with the bank and the military, and who would make sure that no harm came to Kelly. For a long time, it was the Sullivan brothers. When they left Engine 34, another firefighter willingly took over, and then another. Once Arthur Joseph Kelly went to a Cubs game. A car backfired. He hit the ground. There was some snickering, but an older man who had been in the service himself and was familiar with shell shock helped Kelly up and said, "That's all right, fellow. You'll be all right." After that, Kelly stayed close to the firehouse. His mind and his nerves were not good. The firefighters had to remind him to bathe and to change clothes and to eat properly. They did it for 20 years and more without anyone asking. "He's an easygoing fellow," one of them said. "He doesn't harm anybody. It's not so hard for us to take care of him." Then the firehouse closed down. The firefighters were transferred to another station house at Laughlin and Madison. Arthur Joseph Kelly went with them, but it wasn't the same. It wasn't the firehouse he had loved as a child. He didn't want to live there. So the last firefighter to take care of him, sorry, again, trying to do too many things at once. So the last firefighter to take care of him, George Grant, a 51-year-old father of 8, found Arthur Joseph Kelly a place to live. It wasn't much. It was the room on Madison Street. But every month, Grant would take care of the financial arrangements with the bank and would go to Madison Street to give money to a lady who ran a tavern near Kelly's room. The understanding was that she would give Kelly his meals at the tavern. No liquor. The firefighters didn't want Kelly to end up as a Madison Street wino. The firemen had started taking care of Art way before I even got on the force, Grant said. I just happened to be the last in a long line of men who took care of him. I didn't mind. When Arthur Joseph Kelly was found dead in his room, they thought he was a bum, but they should have been at the funeral. Arthur Joseph Kelly was buried with dignity. He was carried to his grave by uniformed firefighters. They were his pallbearers. Most of the firefighters were not even born when, as a boy, Kelly had started hanging around the firehouse. But they were there at the end. The firefighters never let Kelly live like he was a bum. They didn't let him die like one either. All right, that's a pretty touching story. A bum, of course, is what we might think of as a homeless person, but it's also a really derogatory term to call someone when we call them a bum. And so you have this story of this guy, Arthur, who was living on the streets, had no family, and the firefighters took care of him. And it seems like they're really nice, good guys. They took care of his money for him. They helped him get food. They helped him find an apartment. So some really good guys. All right. So you can listen to this as many times as you need to make sure you can read this passage clearly. And I made a few mistakes. It happens. To read this passage clearly, to read as best you can. And then on Wednesday, you'll be recording yourself reading the same passage. So, all right, you guys. Here's a big group hug for us all. All right. Take care.